Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Michael Morgan had always been a man of cold calculation, a successful lawyer whose ambition was his closest companion. His sharp mind had carved out a path of relentless achievement, but that path left little room for anything or anyone else. His marriage to Sarah had once been promising, but as the years passed, his attention waned. He saw her as another piece of his image, supportive, loving, the perfect spouse to his high-powered life. But one winter night Michael snapped. Sarah's pleas for attention, her subtle reminders of a family life he had left on the back burner, became grating to him. Her request that they talk, that they confront the silence that had grown between them, struck him as weakness. In a fit of frustration, he threw her out of the house with no money, no resources, and no second thoughts. He shut the door to her tear-streaked face, feeling a momentary pang of guilt that he quickly buried under layers of justification. "She'll be fine," he assured himself, his mind already drifting back to his latest case. He knew Sarah's kindness, her resilience. He figured she would find her way, just as she always had. But Michael was a man of the present, never looking back. Certainly not for the woman he believed he had outgrown. Sarah, on the other hand, was shattered. She had no one to turn to and no job to fall back on. Alone and penniless, she wandered the icy streets that night, her breath forming little clouds in the freezing air as she clutched her coat tighter around herself. She could hardly believe that the man she had loved for so many years had become so callous, so unfeeling. She wandered for hours, battling thoughts of regret, despair, and even fear, until finally, determination surged through her. She wouldn't let herself be defined by his cruelty. If he had stripped her of everything, she would rebuild. And so, in the silence of her darkest night, Sarah resolved to survive without him. Years passed, and Michael barely spared a thought for Sarah. He continued his life, rising to ever greater heights in his legal career, unaware of the quiet, extraordinary life Sarah was building from the ground up. Each case he won, each accolade he received, he credited to his unshakable resolve and sharp intellect. Little did he know, as he celebrated in his lavish office or dined with influential figures, that he had left behind not just a woman but a family. As Sarah rebuilt her life, her resolve grew stronger with each passing day. With no one to rely on, she found small jobs, cleaning houses, working as a cashier, anything that would help her make ends meet. It wasn't easy, but she found solace in her newfound independence. She also discovered something else that filled her with equal parts fear and hope. She was pregnant. The shock of it nearly undid her. The news felt like both a burden and a gift. How could she care for a child when she barely had enough to survive on her own? But as the reality settled, she realized this child was hers, her reason to keep fighting. No matter what had happened with Michael, this life growing inside her was innocent, a symbol of love she once felt and a promise that she would create a future for them both. The early years were a struggle, but Sarah's fierce determination never wavered. She worked tirelessly, accepting every odd job she could to give her son, Daniel, a stable life. Despite the hardships, she poured every ounce of love she had into raising him. As Daniel grew, he resembled Michael more and more. His intense gaze, his sharp features, but Sarah did her best to protect him from the pain of his father's abandonment. To Daniel, his mother was his whole world, and she filled every role: protector, teacher, friend. Daniel was bright, his intelligence and curiosity matching the father he never knew. He excelled in school, driven by an inexplicable urge to succeed. Sarah never spoke ill of Michael to Daniel, though as the years passed, he grew more curious about the man who had left them. She kept her answers brief and honest, explaining that his father had chosen a different path, one that didn't include them. Daniel accepted it, or so she thought. He rarely asked about Michael after that, yet Sarah could see something simmering beneath the surface, a silent question that would inevitably rise one day. By the time Daniel graduated high school, he had made up his mind to pursue medicine. It surprised Sarah. She had expected him to follow a more practical path, one that didn't require years of schooling they could hardly afford. But Daniel's passion for helping others, for making a difference, was unshakable. He worked tirelessly to earn scholarships, balancing jobs to fund his studies, a work ethic instilled by Sarah's example. Michael, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. In his mind, Sarah was a closed chapter, filed away in the recesses of his past. He never knew about Daniel, never realized he had a son walking a parallel path, working as hard as he did to carve out a life in medicine. Each day, they unknowingly mirrored each other's struggles, Michael in his courtroom battles, and Daniel in the late-night study sessions that kept him awake until dawn. Then, one day, the convergence began. Michael's health, long ignored, started to decline. Decades of long hours, stress, and self-neglect caught up with him, bringing with it a storm of symptoms he could no longer dismiss. He was rushed to the hospital, and after a battery of tests, the diagnosis came: a severe heart condition requiring complex, high-risk surgery. For the first time in his life, Michael felt genuine fear. A fear not of losing a case but of losing his own life. Desperation forced him to seek out the best surgeon, a young, highly recommended doctor renowned for his innovative techniques and calm demeanor under pressure. Unaware of what was to come, he signed the consent forms and prepared for surgery, ready to face the hands of the doctor who could save his life. As he lay on the sterile, cold operating table, breathing deeply under the hum of machinery, a young doctor approached. Michael looked up, his vision blurry as the anesthetic began to settle in, but something about the young man's face struck him as familiar. The resemblance was uncanny: a strong jawline, piercing eyes, and a faint look of determination he recognized all too well. And then, just before he drifted into unconsciousness, a thought flashed through Michael's mind, as piercing as the scalpel about to cut through his chest. Who is he? Michael's world faded into darkness as the anesthesia took hold, but that face lingered in his mind, haunting him even as he slipped into unconsciousness. Meanwhile, on the other side of the operating room, Dr. Daniel Morgan prepared for the procedure with steady hands and a heart pounding with restrained emotion. For years, Daniel had tried to suppress the simmering curiosity about his father. He had learned, over time, to detach himself from the lingering questions, channeling that energy into his studies and his determination to become a surgeon. But when he was assigned to Michael's case, his curiosity reignited with an intensity he hadn't anticipated. Seeing the name Michael Morgan on the patient file had been a gut punch. There were plenty of men with that name, he told himself. Could be anyone. But when he saw the patient in person, that last, fragile barrier of doubt crumbled. Daniel knew without a shred of doubt that the man lying on the table was his father. The resemblance was unmistakable, and the tension he felt in his chest confirmed it. He had practiced this procedure countless times, but never with this kind of emotional turmoil simmering just below the surface. Michael Morgan, the man who had left him before he was even born, now lay entirely in Daniel's hands, unaware that the doctor preparing to operate was the son he had abandoned. As the surgical team assembled and the room settled into a hushed, professional calm, Daniel's mind whirred. Emotions clashed: anger, sadness, even pity. This was the man whose absence had left a wound in his heart, a father who had chosen ambition over family. But Daniel was a professional, and he was not here to exact revenge. His purpose was to save lives, regardless of personal history. The surgery began with precision, each movement of Daniel's hands guided by years of rigorous training. As he worked, memories of his childhood surfaced. Nights studying by dim light while his mother worked late, scholarships earned through relentless dedication, and the constant presence of an unanswered question that had shaped his life. He felt the weight of his mother's sacrifices, her silent endurance in the face of betrayal. But Daniel pushed these thoughts aside, focusing intently on the delicate procedure. His hands moved deftly, every incision calculated and executed with care. Yet, he couldn't ignore the poetic irony of this moment. The man who had left him with nothing now depended on him for everything. Hours passed in a blur of meticulous work. Daniel's team followed his lead, unaware of the emotional gravity of the situation, trusting his steady, focused demeanor. The surgery was nearing its critical phase, a part of the procedure where the slightest mistake could cost a life. Daniel's heart raced, but his hands remained steady. He had come too far to let emotion interfere now. Just as he reached the final stage of the operation, a nurse handed him a small tool, and he caught a glimpse of her concerned expression. It reminded him of his mother, her quiet, enduring strength. In that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. He wasn't here to confront or punish his father. He was here to do what he was trained to do. He was a doctor, nothing more and nothing less, and his mission was to save this man's life. With a final, precise movement, he completed the surgery. He looked down at his father's unconscious face, feeling a complex blend of victory, relief, and emptiness. The room was silent except for the steady hum of the monitors, signaling the rhythm of a heart that would continue to beat because of him. As he stepped away, Daniel felt an impulse to speak, a need to release the words that had built up over a lifetime. He leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. "You have a son," he murmured, the words hanging heavy in the sterile air. "A son you never knew, and who never knew you." He straightened, his face calm but his heart pounding with adrenaline, and left the room. When Michael awoke, the world seemed hazy, filled with the antiseptic smell of the hospital, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, and the faint ache in his chest. His body felt heavy, each movement reminding him of the ordeal he had just endured. He glanced around, his mind still foggy from the anesthesia. Fragments of memory flashed through his head, the surgery, the surgeons, and a voice. It had been a mere whisper, a soft, haunting echo in the dark. "You have a son. A son you never knew." The words replayed, sending a chill through him. He sat up slightly, wincing as a dull pain radiated through his chest. His son. A son he didn't know. For the first time in decades, he felt a crack in his self-assured armor, an inkling of uncertainty that he hadn't felt since the night he had left Sarah behind. That memory, a memory he had buried so deeply, resurfaced, raw and unfiltered. The day after the surgery, the doctor finally arrived for his post-operative assessment, clipboard in hand, professional and composed. Michael looked up and froze. There he was, the young surgeon who had operated on him, the one with the piercing gaze that seemed hauntingly familiar. Michael felt his pulse quicken, his mind racing as he studied the young man's face. It was unmistakable. The resemblance was too strong to be mere coincidence. Do I know you?" Michael's voice came out barely above a whisper, each word tinged with a strange mixture of hope and fear. The doctor met his gaze, his expression inscrutable, but his eyes held a glint of something, anger perhaps or sadness. Finally he nodded. "Yes, you knew my mother." The words hit Michael like a blow. His mother. There was no mistaking the bitterness in the young man's tone, and yet the confirmation left him reeling. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had never felt before. "Sarah," he managed to say, his voice trembling slightly. "Your mother is Sarah." "Yes," Daniel replied, his voice cool, though his eyes betrayed a depth of emotion that even his professional demeanor couldn't hide. "And for years she was alone. Alone because you walked away from her with nothing." Michael's throat tightened, the shame and regret hitting him like a tidal wave. He had always rationalized his choices, convinced himself that he had done what was necessary, that Sarah would be fine on her own. But hearing it now, from the son he had abandoned, the weight of his actions finally sank in. Does she know about this?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. Daniel's face softened slightly, a flicker of pain flashing in his eyes. "She knows," he said quietly. "She always knew. She didn't tell me about you at first. She wanted to protect me from the truth. But as I grew older, I started to ask questions, and she never lied. She let me make my own judgment." Michael looked away, feeling the sting of humiliation in every bone. I thought she would be fine on her own," he muttered, as though explaining himself to a jury. But even he knew how weak it sounded, how hollow. "Fine on her own," Daniel repeated, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Do you have any idea what she went through? The sacrifices she made just to get by. You left her with nothing, and she had to rebuild her life from scratch. And she did, but at what cost?" The words sliced through Michael, leaving him defenseless. For once in his life, he had no arguments, no defenses. All the years of self-justification unraveled, revealing the ugly truth he had buried so deeply. He wanted to say something, to apologize, but the words seemed meaningless. How could he make up for decades of neglect? Why did you save me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Daniel's face softened, but there was a firmness in his expression, a strength that mirrored the mother who had raised him. "Because I'm a doctor. I save lives, regardless of who they are." He paused, his gaze piercing through Michael. "But that doesn't mean I forgive you. You may have survived the surgery, but that doesn't change what you did." The room fell silent, and Michael could feel the weight of his son's judgment pressing down on him. He wanted to reach out, to explain, to somehow make amends, but he knew it wouldn't be that simple. He had missed too many moments, too many chances to be a father. And now, as he lay in the sterile hospital bed, he realized that he had lost something far more valuable than his career or reputation. He had lost the opportunity to be a part of his son's life. Daniel stood, his face calm but his eyes filled with a lifetime of unspoken pain. "Take care of yourself," he said, his voice steady. "That's all I have to say." And with that, Daniel turned and walked out, leaving Michael alone in the silence of his regrets, forced to confront the wreckage of the life he had chosen. As the door closed, Michael stared into the empty space, feeling a hollowness he had never known, a sense of finality he couldn't escape. His son had given him a second chance at life, but not a second chance to be a father. The realization settled into him, cold and immovable, as he lay in the sterile quiet, contemplating the pieces of a family he had destroyed. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.